in this time around. And so there are various things there are various games that we've agreed to play, so to speak. And certainly we can affect, it is a free will universe, so we do have an effect on what way we go, what direction we're going to take. But I do want to say that certain game plans, if you will, have been set in place even before you incarnated in. And
in other words, there may be a certain level of destruction, a certain level, but there may be a remnant saved out. There may be a remnant ascend, or if you want to call it ascension. There may be a remnant of civilizations left, and the amount of that is dependent on how much we're consciously in opposition to the negative scenarios.
Well, there's also the ETs that are on the positive side that have been
absolutely
behind the scenes, working with the high consciousness that is now happening on the planet, certain incarnations of children, the gifted children as well, at this time, this juncture, is helping to raise the level of awareness of the DNA, basically activating the DNA in individuals, and that's what meditation can do for you, and also so when you're meditating, you're actually helping the planet, believe it or not. And so we're actually moving in that direction where we're going to begin to co-create a different kind of future. From what I understand, one of my most recent interviews was with Ashiana Dean, who wrote the Voyager books. You may be familiar with her.
Yep.
And she was talking about an agenda that was going to be playing out in 2012, but is not going to happen, that they are postponing it, that they haven't actually completely changed that timeline, but that they have basically pushed it way, way back for about 200 years, and that there are some extenuating circumstances that are now coming to the fore. So this is what her contacts, who she calls, I believe, the Guardians, who are good, the Guardian races. It's a group of races that are working together to change this timeline for this planet at this time, so that we, humanity, will be able to ascend and also go to what they call higher Earth, or basically ascend out of here completely. And that has to do with the stargates. And I'm wondering whether or not you, Dr. Deagle, and also your guest here, are aware that certain stargates have been taken over by what I understand to be the Service to Self group, and that other stargates are then being activated. She was talking about her sources when I was interviewing her, and this is like a 7 to 8 hour interview that I did last week in Florida, that there are some stargates that are called the ancient stargates that are now being activated and will become ultimately ascension pathways.
Yeah, I think that for those, of course, that are not really familiar with this, it can sound like talking to quantum physics to someone who doesn't know addition and subtraction. There's different kinds of gates, if you want to call it, interdimensional gates. For example, the simplest one is the gate, or if you want to call it, between the physical body and the soul or mind, which exists in a higher dimensional plane. There's also parallel realities. For example, when we talk about dark matter, it's actually just the collective, gates through our time space connecting us with a parallel dimension. So most of the mass of the universe is actually connections with parallel universes, where, matter appears and energy appears that literally jumps into the void. So our world is actually a manifestation of a higher reality. So that when we talk about, how does mankind with a complexity come about with a brain that's already a quantum computer, and all the living things on the earth and all of the unimaginable complexity, the negentropy, or the order that's imprinted. As I mentioned before, when we have Robert Felix on the program, he'll be back on Monday. His book, Magnetic Reversals and Evolutionary Leaps, it's when the magnetic field is down that there's really a download of this higher dimensional reality into the DNA of the creatures. So there's leaps, if you want to call it, in the recreation of those life forms. There's this level of destruction occurring at the same time, so a lot of species and so on die off, but there's also leaps forward into a new type of aeon or eon. And I think these periodic shifts are what we see imprinted in the Mayan calendar and in other ancient societies. Unfortunately, the elite groups have taken the point of view of they're going to be the keepers of civilization, and their version of reality is all accounts, that they don't want alternative pathways of survival. So they're not preparing the population. Yes, Kerry, are you there?
Yeah, I am here.
Okay, are we still live on the radio and Argosug Radio?
Yes, I believe we are.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to hear your response, because I try not to get too technical, because a lot of people don't understand what is a Stargate. You know, they don't really, they probably watch like Stargate on the Sci-Fi Channel, and they see people kind of going through what looks like a membrane to another world, but they don't really understand what we're talking about with a Stargate.
Well, that's true. I have been talking in depth with Ashiana Dean about this, and from what I understand, we're also talking about something that if your DNA is not tuned, and you could walk right by a Stargate and never know it. That's just how it works. And on the other hand, if you do have the activated and required, and there are levels of DNA strands that must be activated for you to enter a Stargate. And the alternative is if you do enter the Stargate and you do attempt to go somewhere through it, which is, it's like a portal, you can self-destruct, at least your physical body in that instance. And there are going to be activations. There are activations at this time, but apparently all of this peaks during 2012, and that's the real sort of
in other words,
well, because a lot of people think that 2012 is going to be something very specific, and it's not quite like that. It's a lot more esoteric.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, the 2012 incident is really not like a solar mass ejection or a pole shift. It's more of a spiritual, hyperdimensional, consciousness transformational issue rather than a physical point in time where a physical event happens. There's been a bunch of physical events, and they'll continue to increase, but the real 2012 issue is more of a change in the nature of mankind and consciousness.
That's exactly right. And so what happens is if you activate your DNA and you do approach a Stargate, I understand there's one in the Mesa, Arizona area. I believe that is still going to be a legitimate Stargate from 2012 to apparently 2017 is the absolute crucial time for certain groups to be able to move through the Stargates into higher Earth and so on. And I do want to say that there's a really interesting corollary to this which people need to be aware of, and that is when you think that you're going to be rescued by a craft, by ETs in a craft, and this is a very deceptive game, and people need to be aware of that.
Exactly.
And so why don't you speak to that, because I'd love to hear.
I agree. Yeah, Jeff, your comment on that, because I agree. I think that this idea that they think that there's going to be, the Andromedans land on the front lawn of the White House, when in fact, all the contacts, including the ones that I've had and others, have been more on a hyperdimensional spiritual level rather than a physical. And those who have had physical contact, a lot of time, it's quite deceptive. And it may be setting people up for a great fall. In fact, most of the craft out there, and even there's an artificial deceptive plan which has been in operation for decades, and I talked to George Green about this several years ago, to fool people about an artificial ET kind of rescue as part of their globalist plan. Your comments, Jeff?
Yeah, clearly that's if some ETs landed or something that was put on Fox News or CNN, the first thing to do is think that it's put on those.
Let's get back to Professor Grupp and Kerry Cassidy. Professor Grupp, you had some comments about this, quote, false ET rescue plan. People need to realize we have it right from the FEMA manuals, which we're going to post up, a 400-page manual that I'm getting with through John Moore and his contacts. They do mention don't get between the Earth and any ET craft. I mean, that's right in the FEMA manual. People need to realize this is not a delusion of late-night sci-fi movie buffs or Hollywood. There really are, and most of these craft, by the way, are not ours, 95%, but there are craft from other places, other dimensional realities, other parts of the cosmos and galaxy. You just have to go through the mathematical equations, which is why even projects like the SETI project, in a sense, are a cover-up of the ongoing contact between higher levels of our government and many peoples with these, and they can be very good and very bad and deceptive. So your comments, Jeff?
Yeah, let me say two things really quickly in 30 seconds. Let me just address something that Kerry said earlier about how you can't just tell people that they can just change their reality with their consciousness because they'll get frustrated. That's exactly the point. That's the reason I've criticized the book The Secret, because I read that whole book, and that was